my man B Money says, what about Matt Ryan? He gets respect, but he doesn't get all the respect he deserves. Plus, he has the Super Bowl loss hanging over him.
I agree with this one. I can go first. And I think here's the thing that I think irks me the most about the Matt Ryan situation. And yes, he had the MVP year. The following year, his statistically, he was nearly the exact same, but like nobody cared because I guess a lot of it you could argue was in garbage time, and their team was not good really at all. But I still think he's been criminally underrated. And the thing that irks me the most is when people say he has Julio Jones. It's like people would, I guess, say that having Julio Jones makes him good when that could not be true. Now, he has had really, really good receivers. He's had Roddy White, Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. But he is still just such an incredible quarterback. And I think the accuracy is there. Maybe throws too many picks, I think, is a complaint some people would have, but I think he's really good. And, that 2016 season when they were running the ball with Coleman and Freeman and then passing with Sanu, Jones, and they had Shanahan there, that was a special season. And really just, I think he's still underrated. And I still think you could win a championship with Matt Ryan, undoubtedly.
I 100% agree. I think he's very underrated. I don't think you can just win a championship with him. I think he's a borderline Hall of Famer. And like the Julio Jones argument that you brought up, that's stupid because he was a Pro Bowler before Julio Jones even got drafted. He also won Rookie of the Year before Julio Jones got drafted. So he was a good quarterback starting off. The Shanahan argument, while it's fair and it helped him get the MVP, you brought up the 2 seasons later with Sarkisian, he put up essentially the same season, but they went 7-9 because their defense was injured and it wasn't that good. Their offensive line was terrible. And, they didn't have Sanu and Taylor Gabriel and Shanahan calling the plays. They had really Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones, and Calvin Ridley wasn't the guy he was last year. He was still, he was a rookie player at the time. So I 100% agree with that. And 3, here's the thing that always gets me. If you remember when Mac Jones was coming out of the draft, a lot of people who really liked Mac Jones compared him to Matt Ryan, and they gave that as a reason why the Niners would draft him. Now, those were wrong, but one of the things that really irked me was that a lot of people would immediately say they don't want Mac Jones to beat Matt Ryan, as if they don't want a guy who started in the NFL. Yeah, who's been a top 10 quarterback for the last 14 years, started in the NFL for 14 straight years, been a borderline Hall of Famer. And that one made me laugh because I was thinking to myself, not just forget Mac Jones, if Justin Fields, Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, if any of them have 80% of the career Matt Ryan has, they're wild successes. They're wild successes.
Definitely.
Being drafted where they are.
Just winning an MVP is already hard enough. Like that really just goes understated. It is so hard to win an MVP now. You could say, like maybe the other quarterback play wasn't as good as, say, last year where, you have the Mahomes and the Rodgers performing at that level. But still, winning an MVP is so impressive. And I think he's I know what you mean with the Hall of Fame. I think it's called the Hall of Very Good, where, you're a really, really good player. You're definitely not going to make the Hall of Fame, but you need to be noticed because of how good you are. And the whole I don't want my quarterback to be Matt Ryan has got to – I guess I hadn't heard that, but that just sounds so ridiculous. I mean, imagine you take someone in the first round, a top 5 pick, and you were to guarantee that they would be a top 10 quarterback for a decade. Who would not take that? Who would not take that? I mean, unless you have the number 1 pick, like the only person who would, I guess, if Trevor Lawrence had that career, people would say he's not as good as he was hyped up to be, but it's still an MVP, and I think he was a first team. He's gotten a or 2, probably 1 at least.
So I think because of Trevor Lawrence's pre-draft perception and the way that he's been hyped up, if he had the exact same career of Matt Ryan, they would blame that organization more than they've blamed the Atlanta Falcons. Because the Atlanta Falcons have not done a great job for Matt Ryan, given what he's been in his career. I mean, how many coordinators has he made it work with? I mean, they're all good coordinators, but he made it work with Shanahan. He made it work with Dirk Cutter. He made it work with Sarkisian. So he's made it work with multiple coordinators. How many different receivers has he had really good seasons with? Mo Sanu, Taylor Gabriel,
Dude,
obviously
they've had good.
Julio.
I think they've had good. I think they've surrounded him on offense pretty well. I mean, do you remember the Michael Turner days? That dude
Right,
was a
Michael Turner,
beast.
Roddy White was excellent. Mike
Julio.
Jenkins
I
was
mean,
pretty good. Julio's incredible. But the bottom line is they haven't had good defenses. I
that's
would
the
argue they haven't had good head coaches. I didn't think Mike Smith was very good. I think Dan Quinn was one of the worst coaches in the NFL, especially on defense. I don't think Dan Quinn does anything creative on defense to help their defense out. And then three, I mean, their protection the last 5 years since Shanahan has left, the biggest problem with the Atlanta Falcons is that, their offensive line got old and now they lost Alex Mack and all of that. And they've drafted a lot of offensive linemen, but none of those offensive linemen are really panning out in the sense that they have a good offensive line right now. It's getting better, but it's still not a great offensive line. And Matt Ryan, we know one of his limitations is that he's not like
mobile.
Lamar Jackson moving around. He can move a little bit, but it's not like excessive amount. So overall, I 100% agree with you, B Money. He is 100% one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the NFL. I mean, the guy has been a very, very good quarterback for a very long time. And I hope Atlanta can kind of gear up and rebuild this team enough because they have a few pieces now that are looking promising. Like AJ Terrell looked promising at the end of last year. Deion Jones is criminally underrated. He's a really good player. Matt Ryan, obviously. And, Calvin Ridley is another criminally underrated player. He was fantastic last season. So when you look at all of those things, I hope that they can gear up with Arthur Smith and maybe let Matt Ryan have one more chance at going deep in the playoffs.
And I did want to bring up, too, so in here, the Super Bowl loss hanging over him. I think his perception would be so much different if they did win that. And I think he played an overall good game. There was definitely times where, they chose to pass the ball at the end of the game that I guess that it just wasn't, I guess, smart to do that. But you can't blame him for Devontae Freeman missing the block or the holding call when they're in field goal range or the defense just, they can only be out there so long, and the offense didn't really have a chance when Patriots are having, 10, 12 play drives and just letting their defense rest and just gassing the Falcons. So I thought he played a good Super Bowl. Definitely second half left a little to be desired because they lost and failed. But I think his perception would be a ton different just by the media if they would win.
That's a great point. One, I agree with you. I thought he played a really good Super Bowl. I mean, the only mistake he really made was when Dante Hightower hit him. He fumbled the ball instead of being able to hold on to it. So I guess you can blame him for that. But the other thing I was going to say is I think if he had won that Super Bowl, an MVP season and a Super Bowl MVP, I think most people would say, yeah, Matt Ryan, Hall of Fame quarterback. I think he would be a made man. And everyone would look at this second half of his career as like, it doesn't matter, like nobody would be trying to replace him or anything because he's Matt Ryan, Super Bowl MVP, won a Super Bowl in Atlanta, an organization that's made 2 Super Bowls in their entire existence, the organization that hasn't had a ton of success outside of with Michael Vick and now with Matt Ryan. So, and of course the Dirty Bird team in '98, but that beat the Minnesota Vikings with Chris Carter, Randy Moss, all of them. But overall, yeah, I agree with you 100%.
I mean, just think about this. He had, in the Super Bowl, he had 23 passes. He had 284 yards and 2 touchdowns. A passer rating of 144 in a Super Bowl. That is ridiculous. But, yeah, no one really talks about him playing a good game. I know that a lot of people talk about the Julio catch, which, they should because Julio balled out that game. And obviously people talk about Tom Brady and James White and the Patriots defense, but I don't know, man. That was insane. And that whole Super Bowl run in general, I mean, they waxed the Packers. Now, they should have because Ladarius Gunter was on an island with Julio Jones, and, you're taking advantage of that 10 out of 10 times. But, I mean, you can't really fault him for that, taking advantage. And yeah, that season was just one of the all-time best. Unfortunately, they did collapse, and the state of Georgia is cursed when it comes to sports. And I think that's just how it's going to be forever.
Yeah.